Most people think credit is a morality test: pay your bill on time, avoid being irresponsible, do the obvious right thing, and the score should reward you. That is how most decent people think the system ought to work. That is not how the system actually works. The system is not asking whether you are decent. It is asking whether you look low. Risk on the exact day the photo gets taken. That is a very different question. And once you understand that distinction, the whole world of credit stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling mechanical. Mechanical is a good word here because the credit system is not personal. It is not sitting there judging your soul. It is not watching your checking account with sympathy. It is not leaning over and saying, well, technically she used a lot of the card this month, but she had the cash and paid in full. So let us be fair. The system is not fair in that sense. It is procedural. It rewards what gets reported, not what you meant, not what you planned, not even always what you ultimately paid. What it rewards is the picture. And if you do not know when the picture is taken, then you can be doing everything that feels responsible and still keep showing up in the file like a worse borrower than you really are. That is the real loophole people miss. It is not a secret button. It is not a legal trick. It is not some magic line of code inside a bureau. It is timing, and timing in finance often matters more than virtue. That sounds cynical. It is also true. I have spent enough time watching how money systems work to know that many of them do not reward what people emotionally believe they should reward. They reward the thing the system is designed to see. Tax law does this, estate law does this, and credit scoring does this with brutal consistency. So if you want to understand why a person can pay a card in full, never miss a due date, never pay a penny of interest, and still watch the score fall, you have to stop thinking like a consumer and start thinking like the scoring model. The model does not live inside your intentions. It lives inside the reporting cycle. That is the whole story. Now let us strip it down. You use a card throughout the month: groceries, gas, subscriptions, dinner, maybe a larger purchase. The balance climbs, you can pay it, you are not worried. Then the bill arrives, you pay the full balance. You feel responsible because you were responsible. And a few days later, the score drops at that moment. Most people assume one of three things: something is broken, something was stolen, or the system is rigged in some evil way. Usually none of those are the right answer. The real answer is almost always much more ordinary. The wrong number got reported at the wrong moment because you never learned which moment mattered. That is why I tell people the credit game is not primarily about what you pay. It is about what gets seen before you pay. That is a much better sentence. And once you understand it, nearly all of the weirdness begins to make sense. The banks are not reporting your account to the bureaus every time you buy coffee and every time you pay a balance. They generally report a snapshot, a statement balance, a recorded moment. And if the moment catches your card looking heavy, then the bureaus score the heaviness, not the later cleanup. This is why the statement closing date matters more than the due date for scoring purposes. The due date matters for late fees, interest, and payment history. The statement date matters for utilization. And utilization is where so many people quietly lose points without ever realizing they are not being punished for debt so much as they are being photographed at the wrong time. This is one of the great misunderstandings in consumer credit. People think that because they paid before the due date, the bureaus must have seen the clean balance. Often they did not. The bank already sent the earlier snapshot, and the bureaus are now grading a version of your month that no longer exists. That is why the drop feels so insulting, because it comes after you did the thing you were told responsible people do. You paid the bill, but you paid the wrong stage of the cycle for the wrong scoring purpose. And that distinction changes everything. Now, once you understand the cycle, the next thing you have to understand is why that one reported balance matters so much. Credit scores are made of categories. The biggest one is payment history. That is why missing payments does so much damage. The system wants to know whether you keep promises on time. Fair enough. But right behind that sits utilization. How much of your available revolving credit are you using? That category is larger than many people realize. And it is one reason an otherwise clean file can still look much weaker than expected when balances are reported high. This is where people get trapped by common sense again. They think, but I am using the card exactly as intended. Yes, you are. The scoring model is not asking that question. It is asking something more statistical. How dependent on available revolving credit does this file appear to be right now? That is what high utilization signals. It may not reflect desperation in real life, but it can still be read that way by the model. That is why utilization is so powerful and so frustrating. It is not a moral accusation. It is a risk signal. If the model sees 40% or 50% or 80% usage on a card, it does not know you have the money sitting in checking. It does not know your bonus lands next week. It does not know you were just routing business expenses for convenience. It simply sees a borrower using a large share of available revolving capacity, and the model grows less comfortable. That is how scores move, not through compassion, through pattern recognition. Now, there is another subtlety almost nobody appreciates until it costs them. Utilization is not only about your total credit usage across all cards, it is also about each card on its own. This is where very intelligent people get blindsided. They look at the total file and think, my overall utilization is fine. Maybe it is. But if one low-limit card is reported near max, that one account can still send a bad signal all by itself. Again, the model is not trying to understand your whole life story. It is looking for visible strain. A single screaming account can make the whole file look shakier than the big picture math in your head says it should. That is why I say credit scoring is one of those fields where local damage can still matter, even when the global picture looks healthy. You can have plenty of available credit in aggregate and still hurt the score with one ugly-looking card. That is not intuitive. It is still real. Now comes the part I actually like, because this is where the system becomes easier rather than harder. Utilization has a short memory. Unlike a missed payment, which can stain a report for years, utilization under most current widely used scoring models resets as new balances are reported. That means the score is not trapped forever by last month. S-picture, fix the picture this month and the file can improve this month. That is why I call timing the loophole. Not because you discovered some immoral exploit, because the category is flexible enough that one well-timed action can improve what gets seen very quickly. That is powerful. A person with a weak file because of collections or charge-offs has a harder road. A person with a decent file whose score is being dragged around by reported balance timing has a much faster path to improvement. This is why I tell people to stop obsessing over whether the credit score likes them. The score is not a personality verdict. It is a snapshot model. Change the snapshot, and you often change the score. That is what makes this so useful. Now, here's the operational truth most people never get taught. If you want better utilization reporting, you do not wait for the bill and then pay. You pay before the statement closes so that the statement itself captures a lower number. That is the whole move. Simple, unromantic, extremely effective. The key is that the card issuer will usually generate a statement balance at the end of the billing cycle. And that balance is commonly what gets reported. So if your statement closes on the 15th and the balance is high on the 15th, then the bureaus may see the high number even if you pay on the 20th and owe nothing by the due date. But if you make the payment on the 11th or 12th so that by the 15th the balance is already very low, then the reported number is low. Same spending, same cash, different timing, better score. That is what people mean when they talk about the one day that controls your score. It is really the statement closing moment, not in some mystical sense, just in the practical sense that the picture is taken there. This is why I say credit is more like photography than morality. If you clean the room after the camera clicked, the photograph still shows the mess. Now, of course, once people learn this, they often swing too far the other direction. They hear that low utilization is good and decide that zero across every card every month must be best reasonable guess. Not always the best outcome, because the model also wants to see that you can use credit and manage it responsibly. A file showing all zero balances every single month can sometimes be slightly less optimal than a file showing one small, well-controlled balance. And the rest near zero, that is where the all zero except one method comes from. Not because carrying a balance is good, carrying interest is not good. That is not the point. The point is reporting a tiny balance on one card, so the model sees active credit use handled conservatively. This is one of the most misunderstood distinctions in all of consumer credit. Reporting a balance is not the same thing as carrying debt into interest. You can let a small amount report on one card and still pay it by the due date, avoiding interest entirely. That is a very different thing from carrying revolving debt month to month. The model sees used, the bank gets paid, you keep the cash efficiency. That is intelligent. Now, I want to slow down here because people love precision in the wrong places. The famous 1% rule is not a commandment handed down from heaven. It is a practical shorthand. Low single-digit utilization, often around 1 to 6%, is where very strong files often live. Not because 1.0% is magical and 2.0% is bad, because the broad signal is what matters. The model sees very light, very controlled use. I had what you are trying to communicate. You are telling the system, I have access to credit, I use it, but I do not appear dependent on it. That is exactly the sort of borrower the algorithm likes. Notice the psychology there. The ideal borrower in the eyes of the scoring model is not someone who desperately needs the line every month, nor is it someone who never uses it at all. It is someone who demonstrates command. That is the image. And credit scoring, more than most people realize, is image management built on real data. Now let me tell you how I think ordinary people should actually do this. First, you need to know the statement closing date for every card, not the due date, the closing date. Those are different things. The due date protects your payment history. The closing date shapes your utilization reporting. If you do not know the closing date, you are operating blind. Second, build reminders a few days before that date, not the same day a few days before, because transfers need time to post. Too many people learn the principle and then still miss the timing because they waited until the eve of the statement close and the payment did not land in time. That is not strategy, that is wishful thinking. Third, on the reminder day, decide what you want the statement to show. Maybe you want one card to report a very small balance. Maybe you want the rest at zero, fine. Then pay them down before the statement generates, not afterward. Fourth, do not confuse this tactic with ignoring the due date. You still must pay what remains by the due date. The scoring trick is useless if you accidentally create late payment damage, chasing utilization perfection. A missed payment is a bomb, utilization is a dial. Never blow yourself up trying to tune the dial more precisely. Fifth, if you constantly find yourself hitting the limit and needing to pay down the card multiple times a month just to keep it usable, the real issue may not be timing. The real issue may be that your limit is too low for your regular spending pattern. That is where a higher credit limit can help enormously. Not because more credit is morally better, because more room lowers utilization naturally if your spending is stable. A larger denominator makes the same spending look less stressed. That matters. But you must handle that wisely. Higher limits are useful only if the household remains disciplined. Now, I also want to say something that almost nobody says when they teach this. A better score is not the final objective. It is a tool. Too many people start treating the score itself like a trophy. That is childish. The score exists to buy you cheaper access to credit, cleaner approvals, better insurance pricing in some jurisdictions, and more favorable terms on important transactions. That is its purpose. So if you use timing strategy to push the score up, wonderful. But remember why you are doing it. You are not collecting points for their own sake. You are reducing friction in your future financial life. That matters because the score can become addictive. People start micromanaging every tiny fluctuation as though life itself were being graded. That is a bad way to live. What you want is a calm, repeatable system that gets the file into excellent territory and keeps it there without obsessiveness. That is the adult goal. And here is another important truth. This utilization timing strategy is powerful, but it is not a cure for everything. If the report has collections charge-offs, identity errors, stale derogatories, or genuinely late payments, then low utilization alone will not transform the file. It helps, it does not erase other damage. That is why I think the right way to view this tactic is as one of the fastest available improvements for someone whose basic file is decent but whose reported balances are making him look worse than he should. It is a sharp tool, not a universal one still. A sharp tool is worth having because there are very few areas in personal finance where a person can improve a visible score metric this quickly with no interest cost, no new product, and no shady behavior. That is why I like it. It is simple. It is lawful. It is just timing. And timing is one of the most underrated forms of intelligence in finance. The right amount at the wrong time can fail. The same amount at the right time can work beautifully. Credit is no different. Now let me tell you the deeper lesson, because this is the part I care about most. The credit system rewards people who understand how systems see them. That is broader than credit taxes do this. Insurance does this. Estate law does this. If you wait for the world to evaluate you based on your private sense of fairness, you will keep getting surprised. If you learn the fields on which systems actually measure you, then you stop taking the outcomes personally and start managing them strategically. That is maturity. Maturity is realizing that I did everything right can still be too vague a sentence. Right according to whom? Right according to your conscience, or right according to the scoring mechanism. Those are not always the same thing. When you understand that, the frustration starts to disappear, because now you are no longer a victim of a mysterious machine. You are a student of it. And once you become a student of it, the machine often gets much easier to handle. That is the real opportunity here, not a gimmick competence. Competence compounds too. A person who understands statement dates, utilization, account structure, limit management, and the difference between reporting a balance and carrying interest becomes harder to exploit. That is valuable, much more valuable than the 20 points themselves. Though the 20 points are nice too, because once you understand the process, you stop behaving like someone waiting to be graded and start behaving like someone designing the grade inputs in advance. That is a far stronger posture. So if you want the cleanest possible summary, it is this. Your score is not always reacting to when you paid. It is often reacting to what balance was reported before you paid. The statement closing date matters more than most people realize. Low utilization is better than high utilization. A tiny reported balance can often look better than all zeros. And none of this requires paying interest if you manage the cycle correctly. That is the whole technique. Find the closing date, pay before the statement. Let one card report a very small balance if you want the strongest optimization. Pay the rest by the due date. Repeat calmly. Do not turn it into obsession. Just turn it into process. That is how grown people handle credit. Not with fear, not with mysticism, with timing. And in the end, that is what the banks and bureaus understand far better than the average borrower does. The picture matters. Once you know when the camera clicks, the rest becomes a lot easier.